is TWiP. Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of This Week in Photo. I'm your host, Frederick Van Johnson. Today on the show, I've got two really good friends of mine, Udi and Joe. We're going to talk about lighting. This is all about lighting. We're going to try to demystify some misconceptions out there about lighting, specifically continuous lighting or LED lighting versus strobe. And does it need to be a versus? Can you get cheap LED lights from a Home Depot or Lowe's or something? Does it matter? Should you be buying quality LED lights? What is a quality LED light? All that stuff. We're going to talk about it. And hopefully by the end of this, you will have a very good understanding of what light, obviously we know what light is, but what lighting gear you should be using for the projects that you have in mind. So with that, welcome guys to the show. It's good to have both of you on. How's it going?
Hey, what's up?
Great to be here, Frederick.
Yeah, it's always good to talk to you. I've spoken to each one of you individually. I'm really excited to have both of you guys on together. Of all the people I know, I think you guys are among the top that just probably have forgotten more about lighting than most people know. Right? So you've been doing it forever. Joe, you've been doing it forever. Udi, you've been making this stuff.
Thanks for bringing that up, Frederick.
Well, yeah,
I appreciate that.
I mean, you were lighting T-Rexes and all this.
Right. That's what it feels like.
I feel like
Yeah.
you're covering the truth.
Hey, we're about the same age, so I don't want to hear about it. so let's dive in. First, just quick introductions. Udi, I want to let you go first. Tell us about yourself, Spiffy Gear, and what you do over there. What is the purpose of Spiffy Gear on in the photographic industry?
So kind of like our brand statement is that we want to make lighting easy and accessible for everyone. We're making lights going from very high-end tube lighting all the way down to small lights that you can wear on your hand. And when we're talking about lighting, people are saying, oh, I only shoot available light, that there is no use for lights for me. But I think that once you learn how to use lights, there's a lot that you can do with them, even if you are an available photographer light.
Yeah.
But also if you're accustomed to lighting, if you're shooting in closed spaces, then, a lot of the times there are no other ways to shoot other than bringing in some light.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I want to chat with you. One of the tangents that how we as photographers get on these tangents and it's like, oh, I'm now for some reason I'm interested in this thing. One of the things that I'm now re-interested in is painting with light, and I've been watching a bunch of YouTube channels with people doing all sorts of amazing things with continuous light and painting and things that would be completely obviously impossible with strobe, but with continuous light continuous light in a tripod opens up a whole new genre of photography. Joe Edelman, you are, one of the OGs in photography. Like I was just saying, you've been doing this stuff for a long time. You run a YouTube channel, I think it's on YouTube, and a podcast called Talk Chat at talkchat.com. Tell us about you and tell us about that before we dive into the conversation.
Well, first of all, it's great to see you guys again, and thanks for having me, Frederick. I am an Olympus visionary photographer and photo educator. I'm a guy who has been lucky enough to spend pretty much his entire adult life taking pictures, and I've done a little bit of everything. Started out in newspaper work. I ran a successful portrait and wedding business for a bunch of years, did product photography, shot food, some fashion work, and now my mission is to try and help photographers understand the hows and whys behind making great pictures. There's tons of information out there that tells you do this, do that, this is how that works, buy this piece of gear. My thing is, what's the thought process? What do photographers think about in their heads that make them do this or do that?
Well, let's start there, man. And welcome to both of you. This is going to be great. I want to start there just with the idea of beginning with the end in mind. And from my experience over the years with a lot of photographers, myself included, we tend to begin with the beginning in mind and try to figure out the end. And what I mean by that is like, hey, let me assemble all these gear, all these lights and cameras and lenses and drones and 360. Okay, Now what do I do with it? I got to figure out some story to tell with this constellation of stuff that I bought. On the lighting side, it's the same way, right? You're like, okay, I need these lights because of course I need a speed light. Everyone has a speed light. Oh, now I need these lights because I saw, fill in the blank big photographer using these giant soft boxes. So for me to be good, I need those. Udi, looking at it from that lens, if photographers should be beginning with the end in mind, how should they approach their lighting, right? So should it just be a story and they're like, okay, well, I want to, like we were talking about, I want to paint with light, so I need to go get some LEDs, or should they have a set arsenal of things that they can pull from? How do you, as a manufacturer, how do you fall on that?
So as a manufacturer, of course, I want to sell as many lights as I can. But also I want to make sure that, it's kind of like they're my babies. I want to make sure that they're getting to a good home and being used well. And I think that you've nailed it right on the head when you said that you need to know what you're doing with the gear. It's more important than what gear you own. When I started, I just had a single lens and a single body. It was a 28-105, I think, by Nikon, and an f/70. And, that carried me through a lot of time. And only when I felt that I can no longer use that, I evolved to the next body and the next lens, and I bought a strobe. And I think that only when you want to do something that your current gear does not allow you to do, then you should go out and look. What are my options? Like, what's the next thing I should get? But as long as your gear enables you to implement your vision, there is no reason to go and get other gear. And I think I heard Joe says once that better gear will not make you a better photographer. It'll just enable you to shoot stuff that you couldn't shoot before.
Yeah. It's on that. I remember, God, it was a couple of years ago. I think it was at one of those remember those big events we used to have, Joe? Like, I think it was like WPPI or Photo Plus, when people, actual humans, would congregate together. But I remember this photographer whom both of you guys know, but I will not name who they are, made the switch from, I think it was Canon, it may have been Olympus actually, but it made the switch from one big brand to another, and the brand they switched to was Nikon, and they were bragging about, not bragging, but just explaining that Nikon had given them all of their lenses, or access to every single lens that they ever, and you've seen that picture of the Nikon lens lineup, all these lenses, and I was thinking, that looks great. Man, I wish I had all those lenses. But then I was thinking, man, I only have a handful of lenses right now, and I suffer from analysis paralysis on which lens, and becoming intimate with the lenses I have. Because, like Udi was saying, you get one lens, you learn to understand that lens. Joe, do you think, like, is it a positive or a negative to have more stuff at your disposal, that you can create literally anything, or should you exercise constraint? What do you think?
Frederick, that is such an unfair question. So there are two sides to that answer, right? The practical answer is kind of going back to a little bit of what you've been saying and what Udi was saying, that gear, I think the right way to look at gear, they are tools. Whether we're talking cameras, lenses, lights, modifiers, you name it, they are tools. Just like a carpenter may have several different hammers, but those different hammers serve different purposes when they're building things. So I've always looked at lighting, whether it be a light itself or a modifier, that as a tool. I do think that as I look back on my career, I think I benefited a lot from learning as a teenager and someone in my early 20s without a lot of resources. So I had to learn to solve problems, because indeed you can have every lighting gadget that's made, but if you're not able to go from, I have an idea in my head, to what is the right way to make that work and achieve that in the end, all that lighting gear, all that camera gear, it's not going to get the job done for you. Because, and obviously this is in no disrespect to any lighting gear or any lighting manufacturer, but all the lighting gadgets in the world are meaningless if you ultimately don't build a foundation and learn things like the inverse square law and learn how to use that as a tool, because that's when those lights become very powerful in terms of your creative potential.
Yeah, no, for sure. And the other thing that helps expand your lighting repertoire is a tripod, right? So for like we're talking about painting with light, or just being able to control that access or that axis of light, the time axis. I want to talk about that in just open roundtable discussion here to start, just about the differences. And this is basic. I know a lot of people that are watching this are like, okay, I know about the differences between light and all this stuff, but the differences between continuous LED lighting versus strobe, and I'll frame that with, yes, maybe a couple of years ago it was like, of course, you're not going to be able to do certain kinds of photography with LED, and vice versa, because you need short durations and all that. But now we have these ridiculous ISO sensor ratings, right? So the duration isn't that critical anymore. I don't know. What do you guys think? What are the main differences from a beginner standpoint that's looking at, I want to do, let's even put a box on it. I want to do portraits. Can I do continuous lighting because, I can see it's WYSIWYG, or should I use strobe? Like I see a bunch of people using strobe with the soft boxes. I don't know. Joe, why don't you take it first? What do you think?
Well, I would throw in one statement before I answer your question, and that is that I think one of the things that photographers have to understand, and I understand why this conversation always happens. I get it, because we tend to do the same thing with cameras, lenses, and we especially do it with lighting. People seem to want to have one light that's going to do everything. It's going to stop action. It's going to be soft. It's going to be colorful. It's going to be all these things. It doesn't quite work like that. I mean, certainly as technology develops, maybe we'll find more and more ways to kind of combine different features, but I don't think we can look at it from the standpoint of what's best. I mean, we are at a point where, yes, I would make a very aggressive argument that says, if we're talking portrait, people, and even a certain amount of action, there's really no difference between shooting with LEDs and shooting with strobes, provided you've got, obviously, the right LEDs, just like it's important to have the right strobes. So I think we're reaching a point where the conversation is honestly less about, is one better than the other with regards to the light? And it's more about making photographers understand that when we talk about cameras and we talk about ISO, while there is the idea that base ISO is always going to give you the highest quality image off of your sensor, we have to start to stretch our boundaries on that thought process to realize that not only the sensor quality is getting better, the software quality is improved dramatically. I mean, look at what they do with smartphones now when we talk about really, really tiny sensors and really, really low light. So even though there's always going to be that statement that says base ISO is the best quality, we need to start stretching our understanding of, well, okay, so if I go from a base ISO of 100 and I shoot at 400, how much quality am I really losing? Like, what is there really a negative impact to my image? Even as a Micro Four Thirds shooter, there's virtually no negative impact to my image to make a jump like that. So that eliminates any of the previous boundaries that we used to have with LED lighting.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Yeah, expand on that a little bit, because I look at it from the, like I was saying, the ISOs have gone through the roof now. We can shoot at ridiculously high ISOs and still have little to no noise. And the conventional thinking was you got to shoot at that base ISO to get the best quality possible. Kind of like shooting film at the ASA rating. Remember that? But are those rules, just to hammer it home, are those rules gone now, right? So is it an artificial constraint where I say, okay, I have to shoot it, my camera is a S1 or whatever, I have to shoot at 100 because that gives me the best, and everything else needs to fall around that ISO 100 speed rating, which cuts me off from doing things that would have been better at 1600 or 3200 or 6400, and I still would have had a pretty good image, especially considering the software-based noise reduction that I have available to me and all that. So, I'm curious what you guys both think about that. Like, is the ASA rating kind of moot now? Udi, what do you think? Is it, or Joe, whichever one wants to take it?
Go ahead, Udi.
So So base ISO, that this is a hardware limitation. Base ISO will always be the best.
Hmm.
But when you move upwards from that, it's not that bad anymore. I mean, especially when a lot of the products that we're making are going out in web resolution. So even
Yeah.
an older camera like the Canon 5D MK3 at, I don't know, 1600 will still produce, okay images for web resolution. But also, some camera makers are now making dual base ISO cameras. So the A7S3, for example, has dual base ISO. So it has a low base ISO, and as you go up, you get a grainier and grainier image. Then the next bump is suddenly very, very clean again, because they know some of our photographers like to use a low ISO because maybe they like to use strobes. Some of them are low light photographers, so they need higher ISOs. So they have a solution that fits both audiences.
Hmm.
So this is maybe one side of it, and then the other one is that a lot of the content that we're creating will be perfectly okay for the medium that we're creating it for. Even if you go high ISO, we get a little bit of noise. I mean, how many times have you printed an image to a wall size, right? So you can actually see the grains.
Yeah. No,
And
that's
as
absolutely, yeah,
as we
that's right.
mentioned before, the other side is the noise reduction algorithm, the compression algorithm. All those are getting incredibly better performance. So I would say that ISO is less of a constraint right now, but still there are some things that maybe if you want to freeze an action or freeze a water drop, there are constraints there that you'll need either a very strong LED or strobe to give you that pump of light.
Yeah.
So yes, in terms of ISO, you can go really high and get beautiful portrait at low lights. But then for some types of photography, you would still need strobes or strong LEDs, just because you need that much more light.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's segue into just that what you just said. In some situations you may need strobe. Some situations, LED is the best choice. We as photographers, I think, are kind of burdened by the word or versus and. Right? We can't. It's Nikon or Canon, Olympus or Lumix, this or that, Lightroom or Capture One. It's always the or in there when there's also the word and in the lexicon. So as that applies to this conversation, can photographers you mix these things together, Joe? Like, can't we shoot strobe and LED together in the same shot? Have you done that? Brought them together in the same
Yeah,
shot?
I mean, absolutely. I think so. This won't be a popular answer, but I'll give it
Uh-oh.
anyway. I mean, it's what they say. I've never had a problem with that idea of mixing. Again, because I came from a place starting photography as a teenager. I didn't have the budget to just go buy everything. I had to find solutions along the way. I think that we have reached a point, and Udi, I apologize. We've reached a point where obviously manufacturers, and I respect it, in order to stay in business, they need to create new tools and they need to sell those tools to stay in business. And we need those manufacturers to stay in business because we want them to come up with the next greatest thing that is truly going to revolutionize the way we do it. But the fact of the matter is, we're never going to have that one thing. I really don't believe we'll ever have, in whether it's lighting, whether it's a camera, whether it's a lens, kind of that one thing that does everything. And part of the reason I don't believe that is I don't see it as a limitation in terms of manufacturing or research and development. I see it as a result of creativity, because there will always be a certain amount of photographers, meaning people with cameras, who are very content kind of chasing what's been done. In other words, they see what somebody else is doing. I want to do that. And good for them. I do not mean that as a negative, so please don't hate me, folks. I mean it in the sense that for a lot of people, they see an amazing picture taken by a photographer, they admire it, and the satisfaction for that person is achieving a similar result. But then there are these other photographers who are on a different creative plane. And they are the people that are always seeing the world a little bit differently, approaching creativity a little bit differently. So essentially, equipment and gear and solutions is always going to be chasing those people because they are going to continue seeing things in new ways. But I have no problems throughout my career. I mean, many times long before we had LED lighting, I have worked in a shot with strobes, but taken just an incandescent light bulb and put it in a shadowy corner to get a warm glow, and then shot with a slightly slower shutter speed to be able to pick up that ambient light and add a little bit of mood to my picture. So I don't see it as all or nothing. I never have. Certainly, maybe if I'm doing a simple portrait studio situation, yeah, it's easier to be working with all LEDs or all strobes because you've got a little more consistency and you don't have to work quite as hard. But if you're limited by budget, even for a portrait, there's no reason whatsoever you couldn't light your subject with LEDs and then go ahead and put a strobe, even with a color gel for your background, because the strobe's a little bit brighter. So that'll help with a color gel. And you could create great lighting.
Be a master of the light, not the tool to create the light. You know, that's a good a good tangent to kind of move off on, is just light quality. Udi, I want to put you put you on the hot seat. Light quality, right? You and I have had this conversation before. Quality of light, color of light, consistency of light. Devil's advocate says a lot of photographers will just say, you know what? You know, these companies like Spiffy Gear, they make these amazing tools for photographers, but I'm broke, man. You know, I'm in the middle of a pandemic. I don't have any money. I'm going to Home Depot. I'm going to wherever. I'm going to Target. I'm going to buy me some lights. And because I'm shooting in RAW and I'm using Capture One or Lightroom, I'm going to put one of these things in the scene and I'm going to sample my black and neutralize any color cast. Why should photographers consider buying professional level LEDs versus, you know, ones that were designed to change the oil in your car? What do you think?
Before I go into you know, a self pat on the back for LED manufacturers, I would say that if you're limited in budget and you need a light, then just go for whatever you can get. So it can be incandescent light bulbs, it can be LEDs from Home Depot, it can be candles, you know, it can be getting the light through the window with a reflector. So if you need light and you have budget limitations, then worry about the high-end lights later. Just get your vision out there, and, you know, maybe it won't be perfect, but light is light. So you will have something that you can show for. Yeah. That being said, when you want to go a little bit higher, then light, you want it to be consistent, and you want it to be, I would say, as good as you can. And I'm going to explain what good is. But there is a certain stage where, you know, if you, let's say that you're shooting fashion, you're shooting for a fashion brand, and they have a blue shirt, and, you know, you send them the proofs, they're not happy, they say the colors are off. You work your little thing in Lightroom, you send them another proof, they're still saying that the color is off, and, you know, by the third time you'd have lost that client. Yeah. And, you know, some of that reason is maybe you didn't dial your white balance correctly, maybe you didn't use a color chart like the one you've shown us, Frederick. But maybe if you're using LEDs, strobes almost do not have that issue. They're usually very good light. But LEDs, we have a very, very wide variety or very wide gamut of quality. So high-end LEDs, they will give you the same color that you're seeing with your eyes. Lower-end LEDs, they will give you a color. Let's say that you're looking at blue. I'm sorry. Your brain knows that it's blue, so it will kind of compensate, but the camera doesn't have any brain. So the camera will see the light that is being reflected off that t-shirt, and it may see a different blue. It may be a little bit more purplish or a little bit more greenish, which were the two hinders of LEDs when they started. And today, when you go out to buy an LED, or especially photography LED light, then you want to make sure that the CRI value is high. And when I say high, you know, maybe LED manufacturers will not like me saying this. I would say that everything above 85 or 86 is acceptable. But if you want to, you know, really get a good color, you want to get a CRI index of 94, 93, and above. And that CRI index means how much of the color gamut is present in the white light that those LEDs are emitting. So, for example, if I'm sure both of you have done this, you shot through a red gel. So everything in the picture becomes red. If you shoot through a green gel, everything in the picture becomes green. If you have a lot of lights and you put all the gel on them, the mixture will create a white light. And if you look at sunlight, this is what the sun does. It gives you a mixture of all wavelengths, and all those wavelengths, when they're combined, they're making a white light. So when that light hits a certain color, that color is being reflected back at you or the camera, and you can see that color. The problem is with low-end LEDs that they are missing some of those colors. So imagine that you bought an LED and it emits a lot of the light. So it has a blue light and a green light and a yellow light and a purple light, but only a little bit of red light, enough to make your brain understand that what you're seeing is white light, but not enough for the camera to pick up that red light. So you'll shoot a tomato, and that tomato will look dull to you. And no matter what you do in Lightroom, the red color is just not there from the light to hit the tomato to be reflected back in the camera. So if you're buying an LED, you got to make sure that it has a CRI index. If there is no CRI index there, that as a generalization, that would probably be a bad light. If you do see a CRI index, go for 85 and above. And if you're a color stickler, then go for 93 or 94 and above. So this is basically the one parameter that defines how good the light is. And that would be the distinction between a light from Home Depot usually to a light that you buy in a photography store.
I love that. See, that hammers it home, And I was thinking as you were talking, when I was active duty in the Air Force, I remember my first year I was stationed at Yokota Air Base in Tokyo, and I was a photographer, and they sent me out to do this group shot of this air crew that had landed, and they wanted to do a group shot before they took off and went to their next location. And I'm the new guy, right? They sent me. It's like it's a group shot. Just put them in front of the thing, focus, click the shutter. We were shooting slide film back then, so I didn't know the differences between different color temperatures. So I grabbed tungsten film and went to a sunlit runway and took pictures of this air crew. Of course, you guys know what I got. It was all like, orange, right?
Creative choice.
It was a creative choice. My creative choice was I got in the darkroom. We were still printing our stuff back then, right? So I got in the darkroom, like, okay, I can rescue this. I know my way around color printing, right? So I spend like at least 2 hours in there trying to fix it. It wouldn't fix. Because like you said, Udi, when colors are baked in there, you fix this color, this one's off. You get the skin tones right, now the sky's jacked up, So guess what my solution was to this issue? My creative choice was black and white. Yes. You guys, you look so much better in black and white. I made a creative choice and they loved it. No one knew the difference. But I wanted to talk about some differences between lighting styles and different techniques. Joe, I know you're running around, you're online, you're teaching, you're shooting, you're podcasting, you're doing all this other stuff. But first and foremost, you're a photographer and you are a master of light. One of the portraiture techniques is high-speed sync. Right. So, and high speed sync means you're going to compete with the sun, right? And you want a shallow depth of field, and you want to blur the background out. Is this one of the areas where continuous lighting can't yet compete with strobe, or can it? Can you compete with the sun?
First, I have to go back and I have to rephrase something that you said. Please don't call high-speed sync a portrait technique. I understand what you meant. High-speed sync is it's a gear manufacturer technique that simplifies certain lighting issues. It is definitely not a portrait technique. I totally understand, there's the whole trend of let's go out at high noon, pick the worst lighting we can find, use a 600-watt strobe, overpower the sun, and have a background that's 2 stops darker so that our pictures look like they were made by a zombie, meaning the same as thousands of other people are doing without really making any attempt to be creative. So now that I got that off my chest, the thing with working outside for portrait lighting, long before there was high-speed sync, myself and many, many other photographers back in the 1980s were taking pictures outdoors in bright sunlight using speed lights with no such thing as high-speed sync, and the cameras only synced with flash at a 60th of a second. You couldn't sync at like 200 or 250 like the cameras do today. And we were able to create situations where we had a background that was a half a stop, even a stop and a half darker, and we had studio type lighting on our subjects. The difference is we had to work slightly harder, meaning we had to pay attention to the background. We had to find a background that was a little bit darker. Part of why this high-speed sync thing has become so ridiculously popular is people are lazy. They literally don't want to have to worry about the background. Well, let's see. If I can create a lighting situation where I can shoot at f1.2, then there is no background. So I can have crap back there. And that's great for some situations. But to do like every single picture that way, that's boring, because then you have a person in front of this kind of random blurry background. And what's the context behind that picture? What's the point? Backgrounds are actually really, really valuable to a picture, folks. Backgrounds give context. Backgrounds help you isolate a subject and show a subject off when you use the background properly. Backgrounds usually have lines and shapes that become an important, integral part of your composition. Composition is part of how you tell the story and direct the viewer. So that being said, can you do it with LEDs? Sure. You have companies like StellaPro that make these lights that you see back there, the CLX10s. It's 10,000 lumens worth of light. Are you going to overpower the sun? No. But can you take that light outside in the middle of the afternoon, put a softbox on it, and if you pay attention to your background, if you want a slightly darker background, are you able to create a gorgeous portrait outside? Absolutely. That's what they're designed for. So, we have the benefit now that LEDs are brighter, they're more powerful. We've got them, battery operated. I mean, even Udi's lights, like the specular and that, which you see behind me on the other side, that's AC powered or battery operated. So it can go out on location. It can be used in almost any situation. But I think part of what photographers need to realize, and I guess I'm really targeting beginning to intermediate photographers when I say this statement, if you really want to advance your abilities, your ability to create interesting light, I'm not even going to say good light, interesting light, exciting light. If you want to get to the point where you can use lighting as not just a tool, the idea, well, I need more light, but also as part of your image, in the sense that lighting becomes a subject in your picture. It helps set the tone. It helps set the mood. It sets the emotions. Lighting helps you isolate a subject. It helps direct the viewer to your subject in the way that you want that to happen. If you're going to get to that point, you've got to get past the lazy idea of, well, I want the brightest possible thing, and I want high-speed sync, and I just want to be able to obliterate everything else that exists. Because that's not really going to get you there. What all that does is creates a very predictable image. Predictable images over time become boring. So,
yeah, but how do you go from the new photographer that is, I'm looking at Joe Edelman's work. I want to be Joe Edelman. I want to shoot with how Joe Edelman shoots. I want that quality, when kind of skipping over the decades of time that you spent understanding the inverse square law and the qualities of light and specular versus diffuse, and sort of getting your brain around that. How do photographers, like going with the high-speed sync portraiture thing, right? If they're like, okay, I'm a portrait photographer. I see these photographers on YouTube going out and shooting, like you said, in midday sun on the beach, doing the blurry background. I kind of like the way that photo looks. They figure out high-speed sync. They go out there and that becomes their look, but they don't really understand what's happening behind the scenes. They may not even understand that the strobe is firing multiple times during that exposure. They don't understand, just understand that if I put the camera here and turn the flash to this, focus and shoot, I get a good picture and people give me likes
because they saw
on YouTube.
Well,
yeah. So how do you get beyond that?
Frederick. There's two problems, and it's actually really easy to get beyond it, but it's more a matter, and this is the part where we, the three of us, we can't tell photographers what they should be doing in this sense. But the way you get beyond it, it's two things. One is understand that if you see a YouTube video, YouTube videos are great for learning techniques and for getting ideas, provided that once you see the video, you go pick up a camera, you pick up your lights, whatever you have, and you do it right away. Don't think that watching the video, you've learned it and now you know it. You don't know it until you do it. But the thing of it is, you know, if I'm going to go out and I'm going to copy what I see in one of those videos, the key word in that sentence that I just stated is copy. So I'm old enough, unfortunately, I remember Xerox machines. Xeroxes, a copy, are never as good as the original, period. They're just not, in part because been there, done that, people have seen it. So the idea of copying is great for the sake of learning. If you are actually doing this as an exercise to learn a new technique, if you're just going to go buy a piece of gear that does 90% of it for you, what you wind up with is a situation where sometimes it's going to work perfect. Other times, not going to work at all. So it becomes very hit or miss. It's kind of like when you watch a Photoshop tutorial, or if you buy a set of Photoshop presets. They look amazing in that video, but your picture's not the same as the picture that the guy's working on in the video. So you spend the money in the presets, and your pictures never look quite as good with those presets. So there's the point with photography, unfortunately, there's really no shortcuts. Gear has gotten, and I love this fact, gear has gotten us to the point where even with a phone, we can point, shoot, and take incredible pictures. Compared to what we could 40 or 50 years ago, the pictures that we take with phones today, with any camera today, are amazing. I think that's awesome. But if you're going to start investing all kinds of money into gear, if you are dreaming and wanting to become professional and make money with it, then unfortunately, it's just like anything else in life. You got to put in the time. You got to, and it doesn't have to be 40 years, but you've got to put in the effort to learn the foundational things. No photographer masters lighting without an understanding of the inverse square law, period. Now, don't get me wrong. I suck at math, so I'm not talking about learning the equation. If you ask me the equation, I fail the test immediately. But give me 3 hours, and I still won't be able to show you all the examples for the uses of inverse square law that I could show you. So it's about understanding it. And the way you understand it is by experimenting. In life, we have these experiences and we learn from them. We always hear the idea, you know, you learn from your mistakes, right? Well, as photographers, I like to refer to it as a visual database. It's based on our experiences. Well, I lit it this way and I thought it looked good, but I went home, I put it on my computer and it's like, oh my God, no, those shadows, they're not flattering. I now have that visual experience to know, yes, that kind of light is not going to work in that situation. So that becomes my experience then that I carry forward. YouTube videos don't give you that experience. Buying gear that solves a problem, all it does is solve a problem. It doesn't give you that experience. So unfortunately, the way you accomplish it is to put in the hard work. The gear that we have today actually makes it easier. It shortens the learning curve. I think that's awesome. But you still need the foundation, right? Even if a carpenter picks up an electric hammer, there's still right ways and wrong ways and places you can use it and can't use it. So you still have to understand how to use stuff.
An old photography instructor I had many, many years ago used to say that all photographers were born with a certain number of bad photos in their shutter finger. And the only way to get them out was to press the button and get them all out of there, because right behind the last one was a really good shot and you don't know where it is. So the only way to keep finding that good shot is to keep taking pictures. Udi, I want to switch to you, man, and talk a little bit about one technique that I think Joe and I both understand. I don't know if Joe, if you use this, but on the Lumix side, shooting video and then harvesting frames from the video to make stills. And when I first heard about this, I don't know, it had to be like 5 years ago or so, and I started understanding, like, from a 4K frame of video, you can get like what Joe, is it like a 4 megapixel shot or something, 8 megapixels?
Yeah, it's close to that. I think it's a little over that.
which is more than enough for an 8x10 print, right? So I'm thinking, well, still photography's dead then. I can go out on a model shoot, set up the camera, and become Steven Spielberg instead of Annie Leibovitz, right? I can just direct and then go back later and harvest the frames, the Cartier-Bresson peak action. I can find the right frame because I have all the frames. Udi, I mean, is that a viable way for photographers to be working, especially when they have your quality of light on the back end?
It would be an interesting way. Probably you can get some good frames out of it. I think you'll have to work a lot harder if this is the path that you take. And I think you will lose something very critical, and that is the interaction with, maybe if you're doing landscape, I know there's some landscape technique for video stacking that are amazing. But if you're shooting people, harvesting video frames, you lose one key factor, and that is the interaction that you have with the model. So the way kind of that this works today, you pause, you direct the model, they pause, you take a picture, maybe you chimp, maybe you don't, and then you go into the next pose. Maybe they'll tilt your head this way, move your nose that way, look at the light, look away from the light, and you try to click and get the best moment that you can, and then you improve on that moment. So I don't know if you're familiar with the phrase spray and pray. This is when you just go click, 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 hoping that something falls in.
Yeah.
So I would think that shooting video and harvesting the pictures later is just like spray and pray on stereos. There's very low interactions there. And I think that from a photographer's state of mind, you can go and say, hey, I got backup, don't worry about it. So you pay less attention to the actual shoots. I'll get it in post. Plus, that would mean that you have to go through the entire session for a second time. So let's say that you were shooting someone for 1 hour. Maybe you got 20 shots, maybe you got 100 shots, I don't know. But those are the shots that you got. When you shoot them from 1 hour with video, you get thousands and thousands of shots. So you have to watch every single one and get, there's like micro expressions and, micro nuances. And, if we were talking about paralysis analysis, this will drive you crazy. So, maybe it could be done. Maybe if you don't have any other choice, this is something that you can do. But I'm not a big advocate of that technique.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've always wanted to play with that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Udi.
Yeah, Joe. Yeah, you were talking about doing exercises and YouTube videos, and I hope, please don't hate me for this, but I don't know, Frederick. The way that Joe and I met was when he released his egg video, and it was if you want to understand lighting, or if you want to be a better portrait photographer, shoot an egg. And what he did is, Joe, maybe you'll probably explain this better than I do, but for me, this was like one of those eureka videos where, my perspective changed before and after I saw that video.
So yeah, the egg, it actually was an assignment that a high school teacher gave me. And the task was to photograph an egg. I had to come up with 5 pictures of the egg, but the deal was, once I placed the egg, I couldn't move it. So all I could do was change the light. In the video that I have, it's called Remember the Egg. You can all have a good laugh because it's a very different kind of Joe in the video. This is one of my earliest videos. But I take a light and I go 360 degrees around the egg. And I have a little face drawn on the egg so you can imagine it as a person. And then once I go 360 degrees around, I start with the light behind the camera and go up and over and behind and below and then come back. And the point is, if you watch that simple little video clip, you suddenly realize that there is no right or wrong. In that entire clip, the only time that you have what I think would all agree is bad light is there's about 4 seconds when the light is in the picture. It's directly behind the egg. But aside from that, what you do see is that every little movement of the light as it goes around the egg, what it's doing is it's changing the shape of the egg. It's changing the texture of the egg. It's changing the mood of the image. So one of the problems that exists in photography teaching is rules. Rules suck, period. And they are stupid. Rules put you in a box. The things that we should be teaching people is to always ask one simple question. It's a question that we teach kids, stop asking this, you're annoying. But it's the greatest question in the world. The question is why? So even if we're going to do a portrait, the question becomes why? Why are we doing the portrait? Well, is it for a resume or a professional picture for a website? Is it for a social media picture? Maybe for a dating app? Is it going to be a very formal portrait that's going to hang on the wall above a fireplace? Every one of those options would ultimately require different kind of lighting, different mood, even, of course, different composition, etc. So if we start with the why, it's a lot easier to make creative choices. And then we can also evaluate that finished image against the why and say, yeah, I think that's this person in this business portrait, they look very clean, very well put together. They look like they've got lots of personality. They look like they'd be fun to work with. I think that's a great portrait, right? And it's kind of a better evaluation. So I do agree that, understanding light from that way, but I want to add something in. I'm going to get in trouble here, but to Udi's comments, Udi and I are going to have to agree to disagree a little bit about the idea of shooting video, get your stills. So I'm willing to make this prediction. I've made this prediction everywhere. I'll make it again right here, Frederick, on your show. Within 10 years from now, we are going to start to see, I'm not saying it's going to be completely flipped, but I guarantee you, we will start to see camera manufacturers put forth, and we could argue that potentially Sony has already taken that step, but we're going to see camera manufacturers start putting forth video-centric cameras, but they're going to sell them to still photographers. What's going to happen is, and it'll probably be Adobe because they would be the most logical one, but it may be some other company, and we have other companies doing this piecemeal now. But imagine if you're in Lightroom or if you're in Adobe Bridge and you have a camera that is designed with a setting, kind of a shutter setting, where you press the button and it's automatically going to shoot a 1-second video clip or a 2-second or a 4-second or a 6-second video clip. That's it. You press the button, shoots that clip. So we'll go with today's standards of 30 frames per second, right? So if I do 4 seconds, that's 120 frames, which right there, that gives most photographers today heartburn because they're thinking, my God, it will take me forever to go through 120 frames. But in that software, Lightroom or Bridge, there will be a filtering system where the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check off it's a person. Second, it's a portrait. Third, we want full face, not 3/4. Fourth, we want a full smile, or not, wait, soft smile, eyes full. We're going to check off all those things. The software is going to bring us back to 3 or 4 images out of that 120 that meet the criteria the best. And then I would argue, Udi talked about needing to interact with your subject. I would argue that this actually gives you the ability to do more interaction with your subject, because if we look historically, in fact, we can go to Google and we can type in the search iconic images. We will see images that suck at composition. We will see images that have poor exposure. We will see images that are not in focus. They are outright blurry. But yet these images stand the test of time as iconic, as incredible. And it's because of the moment. It's because of the emotion. So by having a feature like this, where it's going to shoot a 3 or 4 second clip, this is actually allowing the photographer to spend more time interacting and prodding or prompting those responses from the subject. And it's letting the camera do more of the work. So it's not spray and pray, because I'm totally against spray and pray. Yeah. It's still a situation that requires, interaction with the subject, but it does allow us to get those little subtleties or micro expressions that might be the difference in really making a shot come together. I think the thing that we're missing right now is the software. But if we look at the landscape right now, we have cameras that won't let you press the button until the person's got their eyes open. We have cameras that press the button automatically when the person's smiling. So all of the elements to what I'm suggesting, they already exist. It's just that no one has put it together in a package.
Yeah, and it's coming.
The cameras essentially are already capable, but we don't have the software piece. As soon as we have the software, and what's standing in the way of the software? Computer processors and RAM. And you look at things like what Apple's doing now with the M1s, we're real close.
It's getting really close. Yeah, M1 X or that rumored one, which is going to be ridiculous, hopefully coming out this year. Yeah, there's so much. And again, like we were talking about in the beginning, that or versus the and, right? So the shooting video and harvesting a frame from the video, that doesn't necessarily need to mean that, hey, I'm switching from still photography over to this way of capturing imagery. It could be, the story that I'm trying to tell calls for this kind of photography, or I want to shoot this model and this particular model is uncomfortable with me behind the camera, so I'm going to roll video, 6K, 8K video, step from behind the camera and direct her from my director's chair while telling her to look at the camera over there. You could do that kind of thing. So it's really interesting. Guys, I want to switch gears before we end this. And talk about a little bit deeper about strobe too. So we talked about LED lighting and the quality differences. We learned about CRI, thank you, Udi, CRI and missing bands in the electromagnetic spectrum, right? So what about strobe and the different prices on strobes? Because you can buy inexpensive Godox lights, which is what I have, and for my strobes, and they're awesome. You could get spiffy gear lights, which are amazing. I have those as well on the LED side, or you can get Pro Photo and spend for the Pro Photo type lights, etc. Joe, from your perspective, what as a new photographer coming in with a limited budget and I want to shoot strobe and LED, where should I start? Obviously spiffy gear on the LED side, but on the strobe side, where should the photographer start?
Well, I mean, definitely not Pro Photo. Let's start. We'll start there. I mean, obviously, Pro Photo. Let me be clear, because people say all the time, "Oh, you always talk trash about Pro Photo." I have one beef with Pro Photo. I'll put it on the table. They are too expensive for what you're getting. Are they high quality lights? Yes. Okay. But the fact of the matter is, Pro Photo's making a lot of money. They could shave their profit margins down a little bit, get their costs down, and they could do the industry a good service if they really want everybody to use their gear. But we have a situation today where we've got a lot of amateurs and advanced amateurs that are spending money for Pro Photo because of what they're seeing on YouTube, which is ridiculous. I'm still a big fan of starting out with a good old fashioned simple speed light, because I think that there is still an argument that every photographer ought to have a speed light. There are going to be times where the speed light is just going to save your butt, period. The one thing I do encourage photographers to do is do their research, like before they even buy that first light. If it's going to be a speed light, cool. If it's going to be an LED light, cool. But do your research. Put your credit cards away, tucked away safely, and figure out what lighting system you want to work with. And, I'm saying system because I think that's important. You want to be able to grow with whatever lights that you get. I'm a big believer, don't run out to like Amazon and buy the cheapest lighting kit that you can find, because it's still making the same mistake. I mean, not only you're buying cheap junk at that point, but you're making the ultimate mistake. And that mistake is, if you really want to learn how to use light, whether you're going to do strobe or LED, you're going to start out with one light, just one light. And go watch my egg video and do an exercise like the egg and take a lot of pictures. If you want to shoot portraits and models, I hate to tell you, you can do great things with one light. So master that one light. And then if you've done your research on the system you want, then that's giving you time also to save your pennies and then go buy your second light and master two lights. You're human. So even if you buy a cheap kit so that you can have more and you get those three lights, they come, you unpack them, you're not going to put up one light and just use one light. You've got three lights sitting there. You're going to want to use all three of them. So you've just compounded the challenge of learning how to be really good at light, because learning how to be good at light is not understanding what Rembrandt lighting is or what clamshell lighting is. That does not make you good at light. That just makes you somebody that's willing to follow ancient rules and do predictable lighting. The way you become good at lighting is to learn to see light, to see the nuances of light. And in order to do that, you start with one and you do an exercise like the egg. And then you go from the egg to a person and you look to see what happens. And then if you want to try adding in a hair light or adding in a rim light, you add that light, but then you've got to be able to learn to see the nuances and what happens. So, I think Godox is, when we're talking about strobes, is a company that's doing things right. They clearly understand, and we'll leave out the debates as to whether or not, they've stepped on Profoto's toes or that kind of stuff. I guess I have a hard time feeling sorry for Profoto because I wish they'd lower it. Great gear, but lower your prices. Make it more affordable. Godox clearly has put in the effort to understand photographers, to understand what photographers need and want. And, they're building out a system. I mean, Westcott's kind of entering the market now. Their strobes, from what I understand, are rebranded. So it's not actually their own designs, but indeed, the people that are using them love them. I think it's a matter of find your system early and then grow within that system. I mean, with any gear, it's the same with cameras and lenses. You can't keep going to the internet and looking at a YouTube video or, seeing what the latest thing is on the photo blogs. And it's like, oh my God, there's a new flash. Or, oh, there's a new camera. I better get it. That's not going to get the job done.
Right. No.
It's just going to cause you anxiety and empty your bank.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think Godox, I agree with you on Godox. I'm a fan of Godox, and I think I'm a fan of Godox because of you, Joe Edelman. You and I had a conversation before about Godox before I invested in the system. So now I have a couple of Godox
and I'm not
lights.
sponsored by them. So
you're not sponsored. Neither am I. But it just to go along with what you said, it worked for me for a number of reasons because I have a couple of different camera bodies, mainly shoot on Lumix right now, and I wanted the flexibility to. If I want to move from Lumix later, like say I want to move to Olympus or Sony or whatever, I didn't want to have proprietary lights that I'd have to get rid of all my gear, get rid of everything. So with that Godox system, obviously you just change the trigger and everything should work fine with the different systems.
I do have to throw this in, Frederick.
Yeah.
Since I am an Olympus ambassador, if you keep doing that light painting, you're going to want to go with Olympus.
Oh,
live composite, greatest thing ever.
Why?
Oh my gosh, seriously, you don't know what live composite is?
I know it is. I've tried to do some long exposures. Are you talking about the long exposure thing where you can see it draw
right.
on
if
the
you go
LCD?
to my YouTube channel, you can find videos of me actually at a trade show on a stage painting the background into a portrait with all the lights on in the trade show hall and working with a flash to light the subject and then painting the backdrop. The live composite is basically multiple images that are being taken in camera, but combined in camera into one raw file. So you can actually essentially watch the image develop on your LCD or in your EVF while you're creating your background. And you can stop. What it does on the very first frame, if you're doing it the way that I do it in those videos, the flash fires, that lights my subject. From that point forward, all of the frames that come afterwards, the camera is only looking for new light that is added to the scene. And so it only records new light being added to the scene. So the model's still sitting there, the lights are on in the room, but she's already exposed. So it's not making her any brighter. It's not a time exposure. So it's live compositing all of these images together. It was a feature that was originally designed for doing star trails and night skies. And when I became an Olympus shooter, I was like, hey, that's really cool, but how the heck can I use it? And so I started painting backgrounds in real time.
That's crazy.
So yeah, I've got a couple of videos on the channel.
That's
so if you're getting into light painting,
Those are amazing, Joe.
Yeah,
a lot of thank you.
Send me
a
those
lot
links.
Of light painting photographers are starting
Send me
to
some
use
links to those, and I'll put them in the description for this video as well.
I will. Yep.
You guys want to see what I got for Valentine's Day, February 14th? Speaking of photo nerds, look at that.
Oh, look at that. She's a keeper, man. She's a keeper.
I was like, oh, what's in this box? It's going to be some socks or a tie or some crap like that. This thing pops out, and it was the right one for my camera. So I was like,
there
okay.
you go.
All right,
He's a keeper.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. Joe, before we end, Joe, just one last thing. I wanted to have you not give us the scientific technical explanation, but the Joe translation of the inverse square law. Like what does it mean? Because we hear that all the time. Inverse square law. We hear hyperfocal distance and all that, and photographers glaze over because we hate math, most of us. So explain the inverse square law.
I'll totally give you inverse square law for dummies, because honestly, that's how I use it. I use it based on experience, not based on the whole equation thing. So there's two things to know about it. One is that light, meaning let's say your flash, the power of that light falls off much faster closer to the light than it does further away. So to kind of give you a simple example, let's say my flash was here, my subject was like where my nose is, okay? And then my background is over here. And I do my exposure, and it's a dark gray background, and it stays dark gray, okay? If I move the flash closer to my nose, I can actually make this background darker. Even though I moved the flash closer, the background's gonna get darker because I will have to stop my lens down and adjust for the fact that it is now closer to the nose. Subsequently, if I move the nose and the flash further away, or excuse me, back up. If I move the flash further away, not the nose, just the flash, the background is going to start to get lighter because there's not as much rapid fall off. So it's lighter in relationship to the subject. So that's the first piece. The second piece is understanding with the inverse square law the way light spreads as it leaves the light source. So all light spreads, even when you're using grids and things like that. Grids are one of those things that are ridiculously overused because of certain YouTubers today. Photographers using grids, and they're actually making their light.
You have
much
grid
more
right
harsh
there
than
behind you, man.
than they want it to be. I do, but that grid's serving a purpose. Okay, that grid is creating my rim right here. But basically, understanding the way the light is going to spread, that's how you determine how close do I need to set my light to a background? How close do I need to set my light to a subject if I want to have a natural light fall off as you go down in the frame? And you don't have to know the equations. What you need to do is pick up a light. And if you want to get a sense of how it works, put your camera on a tripod and aim it at a wall, maybe about 10 feet from the wall. It doesn't matter if there's pictures on the wall. It doesn't matter. Just aim the camera at the wall and start with the flash at the camera and take a picture so that you can see where and how the shape of the light fades. Then move the light closer to the wall, closer yet, and then even back up and move the light further away and further away. That's going into your visual database. That's giving you an understanding of, hey, with this light at this distance, I mean, even Frederick, your brand new round speed light, if you use that speed light on camera, and if you get too close to your subject, you're going to have a vignetted set of corners. It's not going to fill your frame, right? So that's the inverse square law. So for, most normal distances, yeah, it's going to work just fine. But those are the two sides to it. And you can read about it. I have a video also which uses eggs on YouTube that's all about the inverse square law. But I promise you, if you watch the video, you'll understand that I broke it down and kind of made it really simple. But please don't walk away from the video thinking, okay, cool, I got this inverse square law thing. Yeah. You don't. You have to literally just take lights and go and experiment with it. But think of all the problems you've been having with lighting. Like, well, I'm trying to light this background and I can't get it evenly lit. That's inverse square law issues. It's knowing where to set your lights, okay? And even the idea of, when to use a grid, when not to use a grid, what's that grid going to do for you? Essentially, all the grid is really doing, it's retarding the spread of the light. It's narrowing it, but the light still spreads, right? So by narrowing the light, you also make the light more direct, which makes the light more harsh. So to spend a lot of money on a softbox and then put a grid on the front of it for no other reason than you saw that on YouTube, you're defeating the money you spent on the softbox.
Yeah, I understand.
Right? If you're putting the grid on it because you want to make the light stronger, or if you're trying to make sure the light doesn't hit your background or something like that, then you're using a grid the way it was intended to be used.
Please tell me that playlist with all the egg videos in it on your channel is called The Incredible Edelman Egg.
It's not, but I may have to do that.
Come on. It's so obvious. Go on. Awesome. All right, guys, let's wrap this up. Udi, final thoughts on LED lighting versus strobe and kind of this world that we're in, like the and versus the or, the quality, the CRI, stop action, high speed sync, video harvesting, all that stuff. Give us your final word from the manufacturer's perspective.
Yeah, I think strobes are going to be with us for a very, very, very long time. The bulb may actually change, so maybe it's a xenon bulb now. But back in the days, it used to be a combustible element. Now it's a xenon tube. Maybe in a few years, it'll be some kind of LED. But the concept of a strobe, of a very fast pop of light, that I think will not go away for a very, very long time. So those are going to be with us for, John, I'm willing to put a stake, John, if you're not a vegetarian. And we can meet with Frederick at PPE 2030 and see if any of those predictions, like who had the most predictions right, will get a steak dinner from the other guy.
Done. Yeah, I'll be the one in the spacesuit. So, with my own oxygen tank. Joe, what about you, man? Take us home. Like, final thoughts on light. You are a photographer. Recorder of light is in your title. What photographers, especially speak to the photographers that are the, maybe the mid-range or advanced amateurs that are kind of struggling with this stuff.
I think your biggest challenge is to be willing to experiment. I know it sounds like a cliche, it sounds like a meme, but embrace failure. The only way that you ultimately are going to advance is to experiment and understand that lights are tools. I mean, we didn't talk much about them, but even the spiffy gear, the Q6s, these things are amazing. I mean, you get them in different colors. You can place them in the corner, something to add light if you're doing macro work or abstract work. Obviously, I'm not going to do a high-end portrait with these lights. And that's kind of the point. No one light works for everything. So each light that you're going to get your hands on is a tool. I have flashlights that I will use for doing certain things with lighting. I will use these even to do the white light version of the Q6s I'll use if I want to do some simple product photography. And I will use that Olympus Live composite feature and actually light paint, because I can basically say, oh, that side's a little bit darker. Let me get a little more light over here, and I can watch it in real time. So any light you pick up, it's a tool. Don't think that you've got to do it the way somebody else does it, and that you've got to find that one light, because I don't think it will. If you're creative, you will never find the perfect light for everything. Doesn't exist.
There you go. Just chasing the horizon, right? Basically, you're chasing the sunset. Joe, if people want to connect with you and see the stuff that you're working on, and obviously learn a little bit about light from you, where should they go?
Easiest spot is start at my website, www.joeedelman.com. You'll find links to the YouTube channel there, the podcast. There's about 500 articles on lighting and all kind of stuff there.
Awesome. Cool. And we'll of course link to that. And Udi, what about you, man? Spiffy Gear, obviously, where should people go to check out some of the stuff that is possible with those lights?
So you can check out our website. That's spiffygear.com. And if you want to see what you can do with those lights, you can check our Instagram account. And that is also at spiffygear. So we feature various photographers and videographers and what they're doing with our lights. So those two places, one for the gear, one for the inspiration. Beautiful,
beautiful. Guys, thank you both for coming on. I know we just in an hour we can only scratch the tip of the surface of all this stuff, because there's so much to learn. That's the exciting part about photography, and lighting is there's always something new, and even the old stuff is fun. Like Joe, painting with light, and Olympus sort of reimagining and adding some technological AI assist into that part of it just brings people in painting with light since the beginning of photography, right? But now, let's paint some new stuff and use some new tech for it. And then the harvesting images from video, there's so much stuff So much stuff. And like you said, Joe, I think both of you guys said is the number one thing is to get out there and get those bad photos out of your trigger finger, right? Get out there and shoot, take some images and have fun. And don't shoot specifically for sharing online. Like your online audience isn't the holy grail and the metric by which you should be judged. It's yourself, right? It's you like this.
Always remember why you picked up the camera in the first place.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, guys, we'll end it right there. Thank you both. You both have a good day, Joe Edelman and Udi Tirosh. You have a good evening over there.
Thank you so much for having us, Frederick. It's been amazing.
Yeah, no, it's always a pleasure to have both of you guys on. I love talking to you individually and together. It's been a blast, just sort of to get excited about light. Joe, by the way, I have yet to take my first photo with this thing. It's still brand new. So it's still a baby. It's still a baby.
We know what you're doing this weekend.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Later today. So, cool, guys. All right, we'll leave it right there. Thank you, guys. We'll talk to you soon.
PP 2030.
2030 it is. You're buying.
Bye.
This is TWiP.